The workshop smelled of gun oil and metallic precision, a scent that had become as familiar to Elena Vasquez as her own heartbeat. At 0400 hours, while most of Fort Braxton slept, she stood hunched over a disassembled Barrett M8201, her calloused fingers moving with surgical precision through the weapon's intricate components. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across her weathered face, highlighting the concentration etched into every line around her dark eyes. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena had been the base's primary weapons maintenance specialist for 8 years, ever since she'd transferred from active duty after a roadside bomb in Afghanistan left her with a permanent limp and a Purple Heart she kept locked in her footlocker. The other technicians respected her, feared her, even. She could diagnose a malfunction by sound alone, could strip and reassemble any firearm in the Army's arsenal blindfolded. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Elena saw things in these machines that their designers never intended. The Barrett's bolt assembly lay before her like a mechanical puzzle waiting to be solved. Standard maintenance protocol called for cleaning, lubrication, and reassembly according to technical manual specifications. But as Elena examined the firing pin housing, her mind raced with possibilities that existed far beyond any manual. The metallurgy was solid, the tolerances precise, but there were inefficiencies, microscopic flaws in the design that limited the weapon's true potential. Working late again, Vasquez. The voice belonged to Sergeant Marcus Chun, her closest friend among the maintenance crew. He approached her workbench carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, the aroma cutting through the workshop's industrial atmosphere. Marcus was one of the few people who understood Elena's dedication to perfection, though even he didn't grasp the full extent of her obsession. Barrett came back from the range with inconsistent groupings, Elena replied without looking up from her work. Colonel Morrison's unit reported accuracy degradation at extreme range. I'm not signing off on this weapon until I know it'll put every round exactly where the shooter intends. Marcus set 1 coffee cup beside her elbow and settled onto a nearby stool. At 32, he was 3 years younger than Elena, but his prematurely gray hair and lined face told the story of too many deployments, too many friends lost to inferior equipment. He watched as Elena's hands moved with an almost reverent care over the weapon components. You know, Marcus said quietly, most techs would just replace the barrel and call it good. Clean the chamber, check the scope mounts, write it up as mission ready. Elena finally looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. Most techs didn't watch their squad leader die because a rifle jammed at the worst possible moment. Most techs didn't spend 3 months in a field hospital thinking about all the small mechanical failures that add up to big human disasters. The silence stretched between them, filled with the low hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of early morning PT formations beginning their runs. Marcus had heard fragments of Elena's story over the years, enough to understand that her perfectionism was born from tragedy, not mere professional pride. Show me what you're thinking, Marcus said finally. Elena's eyes lit up with the same intensity she'd once reserved for combat missions. She reached for a small metal case hidden beneath her primary toolbox, revealing a collection of precision instruments that definitely weren't standard issue. Some she'd machined herself in the base's fabrication shop during off hours. Others she'd acquired through channels that existed in the gray areas between regulation and innovation. The firing pin spring tension is within spec, but barely, Elena began, her voice taking on the cadence of a professor explaining complex theory. The bolt face alignment is perfect on paper, but in reality, there's a microscopic cant that compounds over distance. And the gas system, she paused, lifting a component that gleamed with an unusual finish. The gas system is optimized for reliability, not performance. Marcus leaned closer, studying the modified part in Elena's hands. The surface treatment was unlike anything he'd seen in standard military hardware. It appeared to be some kind of advanced coating that would reduce friction and heat buildup significantly. "Elena," he said carefully, "what exactly did you do to that gas regulator?" Before she could answer, the workshop door burst open with enough force to rattle the tool cabinets. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stumbled in, his face flushed with exertion and barely contained panic. Behind him followed two figures that made Elena's blood run cold, members of the base's Special Forces unit, their presence unmistakable even in civilian clothes. "Vasquez," Rodriguez barked. "Colonel wants to see you, now, and bring whatever the hell you did to that Barrett." Elena's hands stilled over the weapon components. In the sudden tension that filled the room, she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The two Special Forces operatives, she recognized them as Master Sergeant Williams and Sergeant First Class Thompson from Delta Company, studied her with the kind of calculated assessment usually reserved for enemy combatants. "What's this about?" Elena asked, though part of her already knew. The test firing, the impossibly tight groupings, the ballistic performance that exceeded every benchmark in the technical specifications by margins that would be difficult to explain through standard maintenance procedures. Williams stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am, yesterday's range session produced some interesting results. Results that have certain people asking questions about how a standard M82A1 suddenly started performing like a custom precision instrument." Elena felt the weight of scrutiny settling over her like a suffocating blanket. Every modification she'd made, every improvement she'd implemented, every moment of inspiration that had driven her to push beyond the boundaries of regulation, it was all about to come under examination by people trained to identify threats. To operational security. Marcus stood slowly, positioning himself slightly between Elena and the two operatives. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Elena's the best weapons tech on this base. If she found a way to improve performance through better maintenance procedures." "Better maintenance doesn't explain a 23% improvement in accuracy at 1,500 meters," Thompson interrupted. "Better maintenance doesn't explain muzzle velocity increases that should be impossible without changing the barrel length or powder charge." Elena's mouth went dry. They'd measured everything. Somehow, they'd documented performance improvements that she'd been careful to keep subtle, incremental. But 23%, that was significant, enough to attract attention from levels of command she'd never wanted to reach. The modified gas regulator felt heavy in her palm as she set it carefully on the workbench. Around her, the familiar sanctuary of the weapons maintenance shop suddenly felt like a courtroom, where she stood accused of crimes she couldn't yet articulate. "Sergeant Vasquez," Williams continued, his tone becoming more formal, "you're going to need to come with us. And you're going to need to bring every modification, every tool, and every documentation related to the work you've done on that rifle." Elena looked at Marcus, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. The quiet anonymity she'd maintained, the careful balance between innovation and regulation, the protective walls she'd built around her obsession with mechanical perfection, all of it was crumbling in the face of attention she'd never sought. But as she began gathering her tools and the evidence of her unauthorized improvements, Elena felt something else stirring beneath the fear. For the first time in years, someone with real authority was taking her work seriously. Someone with the power to either destroy her career or transform it into something she'd never dared imagine. The question that would haunt her through whatever came next was simple. Had she crossed a line that would lead to disgrace and discharge? Or had she accidentally revealed capabilities that could revolutionize how the military approached weapons technology? As they prepared to leave the workshop, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of the Barrett's receiver. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, someone who'd been maintaining weapons in the shadows but was about to step into a light that would reveal everything she'd kept hidden. Elena's daily routine had been carved from discipline and necessity, shaped by years of turning precision into a form of meditation that kept darker memories at bay. Every morning at 0330, before the rest of the base stirred to life, she would rise from her narrow bunk in the NCO quarters and begin the ritual that defined her existence. First came the physical therapy exercises, 15 minutes of carefully structured movement designed to maintain flexibility in a left leg that would never again carry her through a combat patrol without pain. The exercises were a reminder of limitations but also of resilience. Each stretch, each controlled motion, represented her refusal to let a Taliban roadside bomb define the boundaries of her capabilities. After PT, she would make her way to the weapons maintenance shop, unlocking the heavy steel door with keys that had become an extension of her identity. The workshop was her cathedral, a place where she could commune with the mechanical precision that had become her religion. Other technicians saw tools and regulations. Elena saw possibilities that existed in the microscopic tolerances between success and failure. The Barrett M82A1, that had attracted such dangerous attention, was only the latest in a long series of weapons that had passed through her hands and emerged transformed. Each modification began with the same process: complete disassembly, examination of every component under magnification that revealed flaws invisible to casual inspection, and then the careful implementation of improvements that pushed performance beyond manufacturer specifications. But Elena's perfectionism wasn't born from academic curiosity or professional ambition. It was forged in the crucible of a memory that visited her dreams with relentless regularity. The moment when Staff Sergeant David Kumar's rifle had jammed during a firefight outside Kandahar, leaving him exposed to enemy fire for the 3 seconds it took a sniper's bullet to find its mark. Elena had been the team's designated marksman, positioned 200 meters away when Kumar's M4 carbine experienced what the after-action report would clinically describe as failure to extract, due to carbon buildup in the bolt extension. But Elena knew the real cause: insufficient attention to microscopic tolerances in the gas system, inadequate lubrication specifications, and a maintenance protocol that prioritized speed over perfection. Kumar had died because someone, somewhere, in the vast machinery of military procurement and maintenance, had accepted good enough as an acceptable standard. Elena had vowed that day, as she watched medics work frantically over her squad leader's motionless form, that no weapon passing through her hands would ever fail at the moment when failure meant death. This obsession with perfection had cost Elena relationships, promotions, and the easy camaraderie that came naturally to other soldiers. While her peers socialized in the evenings, she remained in the workshop, studying technical manuals and experimenting with improvements that existed in the gray areas between innovation and regulation. While others pursued romantic relationships or hobbies, Elena channeled every ounce of her emotional energy into the pursuit of mechanical perfection. Marcus Chen understood this better than most, having witnessed Elena's transformation from a decorated combat veteran to a reclusive perfectionist. Consumed by her craft, he'd watched her turn down transfer opportunities, decline invitations to join more prestigious units, and consistently refuse advancement that would take her away from hands-on weapons maintenance. "You're too good for this job," Marcus had told her once during a rare moment of personal conversation. "You could be teaching at Aberdeen Proving Ground, consulting for manufacturers, leading research teams. Why do you stay here, working on the same rifles and pistols day after day?" Elena's response had been characteristically direct: "Because these weapons go downrange with soldiers who trust them to work when everything else falls apart. I can't improve every rifle in the Army, but I can make sure that every rifle I touch performs exactly as it should." What Marcus didn't fully understand was the depth of Elena's internal contradictions. By day, she was the epitome of military professionalism, following protocols, maintaining paperwork, and ensuring that every repair met or exceeded regulatory standards. But in the quiet hours before dawn and after duty, when the workshop belonged to her alone, Elena allowed herself to explore possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of approved procedures. She had developed her own network of suppliers, sources for specialized components and materials that weren't available through standard military channels. A machinist in Colorado Springs who could fabricate precision parts to tolerances that exceeded commercial specifications. A metallurgist in Detroit who experimented with advanced coatings that reduced friction and heat buildup. A retired Navy weapons officer in San Diego who understood ballistics at a level that bordered on artistry. These relationships existed in the shadows of regulation, carefully maintained through personal funds and off-duty time. Elena justified them as professional development, but she knew that others might view her activities as violations of procurement protocols or unauthorized modifications to military equipment. The morning after her confrontation with Special Forces, Elena arrived at the workshop to find it transformed. Every tool cabinet had been opened and inventoried. Her personal equipment, the precision instruments and specialized components she'd accumulated over years of dedicated work, had been photographed and cataloged. Even her coffee cup had been moved, a small violation that somehow felt more invasive than the systematic documentation of her professional tools. Master Sergeant Williams was waiting for her, along with a woman Elena didn't recognize, a civilian wearing the kind of understated professional attire that suggested government affiliation at levels far above base command. The woman's presence filled the workshop with an authority that made Elena's mouth go dry. "Sergeant Vasquez," Williams began, his tone more respectful than threatening, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Army Research Laboratory. Dr. Mitchell has some questions about your work." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, extending a hand that Elena shook with careful reserve. The woman's grip was firm, her gaze direct and assessing in a way that suggested both intelligence and experience dealing with military personnel who might be less than forthcoming. "Sergeant Vasquez, I've been reviewing the performance data from your modified Barrett rifle," Dr. Mitchell said without preamble. "The improvements you achieved are remarkable, and frankly, they raise questions about why similar modifications aren't standard across the platform." Elena felt the familiar weight of scrutiny, but something in Dr. Mitchell's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Still, years of military discipline made her response carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I simply performed maintenance according to technical specifications." Dr. Mitchell smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both knowing and encouraging. "Sergeant Vasquez, technical specifications don't result in the kind of performance improvements we documented. Your gas regulator modification alone represents an understanding of internal ballistics that exceeds most graduate-level engineering programs." The statement hung in the air between them, a challenge wrapped in acknowledgement. Elena realized that Dr. Mitchell wasn't here to punish her for unauthorized modifications. She was here to understand how a maintenance technician with no formal engineering background had achieved improvements that should have required teams of specialists and months of testing. "May I ask," Dr. Mitchell continued, "where you developed your understanding of advanced metallurgy and precision manufacturing? Your military record indicates weapons maintenance training, but nothing that would explain the sophistication of the modifications we've identified." Elena found herself at a crossroads that would define everything that followed. She could continue to downplay her capabilities, insist that she'd simply followed standard procedures, and hope that the attention would eventually fade. Or she could acknowledge the truth, that she'd spent years developing expertise that existed outside formal channels, driven by a perfectionism that bordered on obsession. The choice was made for her. by a memory that surfaced without warning. Kumar's face in the moments before his rifle jammed, the confidence of a professional soldier who trusted his equipment completely. Elena realized that her modifications weren't violations of regulation. They were tributes to every soldier who deserved weapons that performed exactly as promised. "Ma'am," Elena said quietly, "I've spent 8 years thinking about the ways that small mechanical failures become big, human disasters. Every improvement I've made started with a simple question. How can I ensure that this weapon will never fail the person who depends on it?" Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly, recognition dawning in her expression. "Sergeant Vasquez, what would you say if I told you that your modifications to a single rifle have attracted attention from the highest levels of Army leadership, and that there are people who believe your approach to weapons optimization could revolutionize how we think about individual soldier equipment?" Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The carefully constructed routine of her military life suddenly revealed as preparation for a future she'd never imagined. The workshop. Around her, the sanctuary where she'd pursued perfection in solitude, was about to become something entirely different. But even as possibility beckoned, Elena found herself thinking about the other weapons in her care, the routine maintenance tasks that would be performed by other technicians if she were transferred to some research facility or advanced development program. Who would ensure that those weapons received the attention they deserved? Who would carry forward the commitment to perfection that had defined her career? Dr. Mitchell seemed to sense her internal conflict. "Sergeant Vasquez, change doesn't happen overnight, and excellence isn't built through individual effort alone. What we're discussing is the possibility of scaling your approach, of developing training programs and modification protocols that could benefit every soldier in the Army." Elena looked around the workshop, seeing it simultaneously as the place where she'd found purpose and as the launching point for possibilities she'd never dared imagine. The Barrett rifle, reassembled and ready for further testing, sat on her workbench like a testament to the power of refusing to accept good enough as an acceptable standard. The question that would define her future was becoming clear. Was she ready to step out of the shadows of individual perfectionism and into the complex, collaborative world of institutional change? And if she took that step, could she maintain the standards that had driven her work while navigating the politics and compromises that inevitably accompanied recognition at higher levels of command? The first sign that Elena's world was expanding beyond her control came 3 days later, when she arrived at the workshop to find 2 additional civilians waiting alongside Dr. Mitchell. The man wore an expensive suit that looked out of place on a military base, while the woman carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to classified briefings and security clearances that existed at levels Elena had never imagined. "Sergeant Vasquez," Dr. Mitchell began, "I'd like you to meet Mr. James Harrison from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and Ms. Linda Blackwood from the Pentagon's Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office. They're here because your Barrett modifications have raised some interesting questions about our approach to weapons development." Elena felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, but this time the pressure came with an undercurrent of possibility that made her pulse quicken. DARPA, the Pentagon. These weren't routine inquiries about maintenance protocols. They represented attention from levels of the defense establishment that could either destroy her career or transform it in ways she'd never contemplated. Harrison stepped forward first, his handshake firm, but his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Vasquez, I'll be direct. The performance improvements you achieved shouldn't be possible through standard maintenance procedures. Either you've stumbled onto something that our best engineers have missed, or you've developed capabilities that could represent a significant advancement in small arms technology." Blackwood nodded in agreement, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of soldiers. "We've reviewed your service record, your training history, and your performance evaluations. Nothing in your background suggests the technical expertise required for the modifications we've documented. That discrepancy is either a security concern or an opportunity. We're here to determine which. Elena realized that she was no longer dealing with friendly inquiry or routine investigation. These people represented institutional power at levels where individual soldiers became either assets to be exploited or threats to be neutralized. Her response would determine which category she occupied. "Ma'am, sir," Elena began carefully, "everything I've done has been motivated by a simple goal: ensuring that weapons perform exactly as soldiers expect them to perform. If I've exceeded standard procedures, it's because standard procedures sometimes aren't sufficient to guarantee the reliability that lives depend on." Harrison exchanged a look with Blackwood, a silent communication that suggested they'd anticipated this response. "Sergeant Vasquez, we understand your motivations. What we need to understand is your methods. The gas regulator modification alone represents an understanding of fluid dynamics and metallurgy that typically requires advanced degrees and years of specialized experience." Dr. Mitchell intervened before Elena could respond, her tone suggesting protective advocacy. "What we're seeing here is the practical application of intuitive engineering talent. Sergeant Vasquez has developed her expertise through hands-on experience and self-directed study. The question isn't whether her background fits traditional patterns, it's whether her results justify expanding her opportunities." The tension in the room shifted subtly, Elena recognizing that Dr. Mitchell was positioning herself as an ally in whatever bureaucratic maneuvering was about to unfold. But alliance came with obligations, and Elena sensed that accepting support would commit her to paths she might not be prepared to travel. Blackwood consulted a tablet, scrolling through information that Elena couldn't see, but which apparently contained details about her life that extended beyond her military service. "Sergeant Vasquez, our research indicates that you've been purchasing specialized materials and components through personal funds. Precision manufacturing equipment, advanced coatings, metallurgical testing supplies. Can you explain the need for these acquisitions?" Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. They'd investigated her personal purchases, traced her relationships with suppliers, documented activities that she'd believed were private. The realization that her pursuit of perfection had generated an intelligence profile was both terrifying and oddly validating. "I wanted to understand how things work," Elena said simply. "Not just according to technical manuals, but at the level where theory becomes practice. You can read about metallurgy and ballistics, but real understanding comes from working with materials, testing modifications, seeing how small changes affect performance." Harrison leaned forward, his expression intensifying. "Sergeant Vasquez, that kind of independent research represents either exceptional dedication or concerning behavior. In your case, we need to determine whether you're a valuable asset or a potential security risk." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. Security risk. The phrase carried implications that could destroy everything she'd built, could transform her from a decorated veteran into a suspect whose loyalty was questioned. But beneath the fear, she felt a growing anger at the suggestion that her commitment to excellence somehow constituted a threat. "Sir," Elena replied, her voice carrying an edge that surprised everyone in the room, "the only security risk I represent is to the assumption that good enough is an acceptable standard for weapons that soldiers carry into combat. If pursuing perfection makes me suspect, then maybe the problem isn't with my methods, it's with a system that's satisfied with mediocrity." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Elena realized that she'd crossed a line, had challenged authority figures who possessed the power to end her career with a few words in the right reports. But she also realized that she'd reached a point where backing down would represent a betrayal of everything she'd worked to achieve. Dr. Mitchell smiled, expression that seemed to acknowledge Elena's courage while warning of the dangers ahead. What Sergeant Vasquez is saying is that her modifications represent a commitment to excellence that could benefit the entire military if properly channeled. The question is whether we're prepared to support that commitment or suppress it. Blackwood set down her tablet, studying Elena with calculating assessment. Sergeant Vasquez, let me be clear about what's at stake here. Your modifications to a single rifle have demonstrated performance improvements that could affect procurement decisions worth billions of dollars. That level of impact attracts attention from congressional oversight committees, defense contractors, and foreign intelligence services. We need to know that you understand the implications of your work. Elena felt the weight of institutional machinery pressing down on her, recognizing that she was no longer an individual soldier, pursuing personal standards of excellence. Whether she'd intended it or not, her work had become a factor in decisions that extended far beyond the weapons maintenance shop at Fort Braxton. But even as the scope of consequences became clear, Elena found herself thinking about Marcus Chun, about the other technicians who would continue performing routine maintenance, while she navigated whatever bureaucratic labyrinth lay ahead. Would her transition to higher levels of attention improve conditions for the soldiers and support personnel who remained in traditional roles? Or would it simply remove one advocate for excellence from a system that desperately needed reform? "Ma'am," Elena said finally, "I understand that my work has attracted attention I never intended. But I need to know that whatever happens next will actually improve outcomes for the soldiers who depend on these weapons. If this is about procurement, politics, or institutional advancement, then I'm not the right person for whatever you have in mind." Harrison and Blackwood exchanged another look, this one suggesting surprise at Elena's directness. Dr. Mitchell nodded approvingly, recognizing that Elena was demanding accountability from the system that sought to co-opt her talents. "Sergeant Vasquez," Harrison said carefully, "what we're proposing is an opportunity to expand your impact beyond individual weapons maintenance. Research assignments, development programs, training initiatives that could institutionalize the standards you've developed through personal commitment." Elena weighed the offer, recognizing both its potential and its dangers. Institutional involvement would provide resources and support that could amplify her impact exponentially. But it would also subject her work to political pressures, bureaucratic constraints, and compromise that might dilute the very standards she'd fought to maintain. The Barrett rifle sat on her workbench, silently witnessing a conversation that would determine whether Elena's pursuit of perfection would remain a personal obsession or become a catalyst for systematic change. The weapon represented years of careful improvement, each modification tested and refined until performance exceeded every specification. But it also represented the beginning of a transformation that Elena was only beginning to understand as the meeting continued. Elena realized that she was no longer just a weapons maintenance technician who happened to achieve remarkable results. She was becoming a symbol of what individual dedication could accomplish, and symbols were inevitably co-opted by forces beyond their control. The question that would define everything that followed was whether Elena could navigate the transition from individual excellence to institutional influence without losing the commitment to perfection that had made her valuable in the first place. But beneath all the strategic considerations, one truth remained constant. Somewhere at that very moment, soldiers were conducting operations with weapons that might fail at the worst possible moment. Whether Elena chose institutional advancement or continued individual focus, her ultimate responsibility was to those soldiers who trusted their equipment to perform exactly as promised. The weight of that responsibility would guide every decision she made, regardless of the bureaucratic pressures and political maneuvering that swirled around her unexpected transition from obscurity to significance. Master Sergeant Williams, who had remained silent throughout the civilian discussions, finally spoke. "Sergeant Vasquez, whatever path you choose, The soldiers in my unit want you to know that your work has already made a difference. The Barrett you modified performed flawlessly during last week's operation. Perfect accuracy, no malfunctions. Exactly the reliability we needed when everything else was going wrong. Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, recognizing that Williams had given her the only validation that truly mattered. Her work had protected soldiers in combat. Everything else, the bureaucratic attention, the institutional opportunities, the political implications, was secondary to that fundamental success. 2 weeks after her first meeting with the DARPA representatives, Elena found herself standing in a conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by senior officers, defense contractors, and government officials whose combined authority could reshape military procurement across all branches of service. The transition from weapons maintenance technician to consultant on advanced small arms technology had happened with bewildering speed, leaving Elena feeling simultaneously validated and overwhelmed. General Patricia Hawthorne, Director of Army Capabilities Integration, sat at the head of a mahogany table that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror of institutional power. To Elena's surprise, the general's first words weren't about technical specifications or bureaucratic procedures. They were about soldiers. "Sergeant Vasquez," General Hawthorne began, "3 days ago, a squad from the 82nd Airborne conducted a reconnaissance mission in Syria using equipment that included your modified Barrett rifle. The operation required precision shots at ranges that pushed the weapon's capabilities to their limits. According to the after-action report, your modifications made the difference between mission success and potential casualties." Elena felt the familiar mixture of pride and responsibility that accompanied news of her work's practical impact. But she also sensed that this revelation was intended to establish the stakes for whatever discussion would follow. Her modifications weren't just technical achievements, they were combat multipliers that affected real operations with real consequences. Colonel David Morrison, whom Elena recognized from her base commander's staff, leaned forward with evident interest. "General, if I may, the performance improvements Sergeant Vasquez achieved with a single rifle raise obvious questions about why similar modifications aren't standard across our weapons systems. Are we looking at implementation failures, procurement limitations, or fundamental gaps in our development processes?" Dr. Mitchell, who had become Elena's primary advocate in the expanding constellation of interested parties, consulted her tablet before responding. "Colonel, that's exactly the question we're here to address. Sergeant Vasquez represents a case study in how individual expertise and institutional processes sometimes diverge in ways that limit operational effectiveness." Elena realized that she'd become a symbol in a larger debate about military innovation, procurement reform, and the tension between standardization and optimization. Her personal pursuit of perfection had inadvertently highlighted systemic issues that extended far beyond weapons maintenance protocols. A man Elena didn't recognize, his nameplate read, "Dr. Robert Chun, Office of the Secretary of Defense," opened a thick briefing folder and began reading statistics that made Elena's mouth go dry. "Ladies and gentlemen, our analysis indicates that Sergeant Vasquez's approach to weapons optimization could potentially improve small arms effectiveness across the entire Army by margins ranging from 15 to 35%, depending on platform and application. The implications for training requirements, ammunition consumption, and mission success rates are significant enough to warrant systematic investigation." Elena interrupted before she could stop herself. "Sir, with respect, those numbers assume that my modifications can be scaled and standardized without losing the individual attention that makes them effective. Every weapon is slightly different. Every component has unique characteristics that affect performance. Mass production of modifications might not achieve the same results as hand-fitted improvements." The room fell silent. Senior officers and Defense officials suddenly confronted by a perspective they hadn't anticipated. Elena realized that she'd challenged a fundamental assumption about how military technology was developed and deployed. The idea that individual excellence could be systematically replicated through institutional processes. General Hawthorne smiled, an expression that suggested both appreciation and warning. Sergeant Vasquez, you've identified the central challenge we're facing. How do we balance standardization with optimization? How do we institutionalize individual excellence without bureaucratizing it into ineffectiveness? Before Elena could respond, her attention was drawn to a familiar figure entering the conference room. Master Sergeant Williams carried himself with the same quiet authority Elena remembered from their first encounter, but his expression suggested something more complex than routine briefing attendance. "General," Williams said, "I have an update from the field that's directly relevant to our discussion." He paused, consulting notes that appeared to have been hastily written. Yesterday, units equipped with standard Barrett rifles experienced multiple performance issues during operations in Afghanistan. 3 separate incidents of accuracy degradation, 1 failure to extract, and 1 complete malfunction that required weapon replacement. Elena felt her stomach clench. The failures Williams described were exactly the kind of preventable problems that had motivated her pursuit of perfection. Somewhere, soldiers were dealing with equipment that performed below standard because the institutional commitment to excellence didn't match her personal standards. "Master Sergeant," Elena said, unable to remain silent, "were those weapons maintained according to standard protocols? Had they received proper inspection and component replacement?" Williams nodded grimly. All weapons had been maintained according to technical manual specifications by qualified technicians. The problems weren't caused by maintenance failures, they were caused by the limitations of standard maintenance procedures. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, recognizing an opportunity to strengthen her advocacy for Elena's approach. "What Master Sergeant Williams is describing illustrates the difference between acceptable performance and optimal performance. Sergeant Vasquez's modifications just improve weapons that are already functional. They prevent failures that standard procedures can't address." Colonel Morrison's expression darkened as he processed the implications. "Are we saying that our current maintenance protocols are inadequate? That weapons passing standard inspection are still prone to failure during critical operations?" Elena found herself at the center of a discussion that challenged fundamental assumptions about military readiness and equipment reliability. Her individual pursuit of perfection had revealed systemic weaknesses that potentially affected thousands of weapons and tens of thousands of soldiers. "Sir," Elena said carefully, "standard protocols are designed to ensure minimum acceptable performance across large quantities of equipment. What I've been doing is optimizing individual weapons to perform at their maximum potential. The difference is significant, but it requires time, expertise, and attention to detail that doesn't scale easily to institutional levels." General Hawthorne consulted her own notes before addressing the room with obvious authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're discussing is a fundamental question about how we balance efficiency with effectiveness. Sergeant Vasquez has demonstrated that individual weapons can perform far beyond standard specifications, but scaling that approach would require changes to training programs, procurement processes, and maintenance protocols across the entire Army." Elena realized that she was witnessing the beginning of institutional change that could affect every aspect of military weapon systems. Her modifications to a single Barrett rifle had become the catalyst for discussions about reform that extended from individual soldier equipment to Pentagon-level policy decisions. But even as the scope of potential change became clear, Elena found herself thinking about the immediate consequences for soldiers currently deployed with weapons maintained according to standard protocols. How many performance issues could be prevented if her techniques were implemented immediately? How many potential failures were occurring because institutional processes prioritized speed and standardization over individual optimization? Dr. Robert Chun cleared his throat, drawing attention back to his briefing materials. The Office of the Secretary of Defense has authorized a pilot program to test systematic implementation of Sergeant Vasquez's optimization techniques. We're proposing to select 50 weapons from active units, apply her modifications under controlled conditions, and measure performance improvements across multiple operational scenarios. Elena felt excitement and apprehension in equal measure. A pilot program represented validation of her work, but it also meant subjecting her individualized approach to the scrutiny and standardization that might compromise its effectiveness. Dr. Chun, Elena said, I appreciate the confidence, but I need to emphasize that what I do isn't just technical modification. It's diagnostic work that requires understanding each weapon's unique characteristics. Turning my approach into a standardized procedure might eliminate the very factors that make it effective. The observation sparked immediate discussion among the assembled officials, some arguing for systematic implementation, while others expressed concern about the complexity and resource requirements of individualized optimization. Master Sergeant Williams raised his hand, requesting permission to speak. General, if I may offer a perspective from the operator level, our people don't care about procurement politics or institutional efficiency. They care about whether their weapons will perform when their lives depend on it. If Sergeant Vasquez has found ways to make that more likely, then our job is to support her work, not constrain it to fit existing processes. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward Williams, recognizing that he'd articulated the fundamental truth that motivated all her efforts. Soldiers deserved weapons that performed exactly as promised, regardless of the administrative complexity required to achieve. That standard. General Hawthorne stood, her movement commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. Here's what we're going to do. Sergeant Vasquez will work with Dr. Mitchell to develop training protocols that can transfer her diagnostic techniques to other weapons technicians. We'll implement a phased approach, starting with critical units, documenting results, and expanding based on demonstrated effectiveness. Elena felt the weight of institutional expectations settling over her, but also the satisfaction of knowing that her work would finally receive the support it deserved. The Barrett rifle that had started everything sat in a secure case beside her chair, a testament to what individual dedication could achieve when given proper recognition. But as the meeting continued, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Her quiet pursuit of perfection was about to become a public commitment to institutional change, with all the visibility, pressure, and political complexity that such transitions entailed. Dr. Mitchell caught her eye across the conference table, offering a smile that seemed to acknowledge both the opportunity and the challenges ahead. Elena nodded in return, accepting the unspoken contract that would transform her from an anonymous technician into a catalyst for systematic reform. The revelation that her individual standards could become institutional policy was both thrilling and terrifying. But as Elena thought about Master Sergeant Williams's words about soldiers who depended on their weapons to perform, when lives were at stake, she knew that the complexity ahead was justified by the potential to save lives through superior equipment reliability. 3 hours later, as Elena emerged from the Pentagon into the Virginia afternoon sunlight, she carried with her orders that would change everything: temporary assignment to the Army Research Laboratory, access to resources she'd never imagined, and responsibility for developing training programs that could institutionalize her approach to weapons optimization. The transition from maintenance technician to technical consultant represented validation of everything she'd worked to achieve. But it also meant leaving behind the quiet sanctuary of individual craftsmanship for the collaborative complexity of institutional change. Master Sergeant Williams waited for her outside the main entrance, his expression suggesting understanding of the magnitude of what had just occurred. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said simply, "my people want you to know that whatever happens next, your work has already made a difference. The rifle you modified saved lives last week. That's not politics or bureaucracy, that's the kind of impact that justifies everything else." Elena felt tears threatening as she recognized the truth in Williams's words. Whatever administrative complexity lay ahead, whatever political pressure she would face, whatever compromises might be required to scale her individual approach to institutional levels, none of it changed the fundamental reality that superior weapons performance translated directly into improved soldier safety. The Barrett rifle case felt heavier as she carried it to the waiting vehicle that would transport her to her new assignment. Inside that case lay not just a modified weapon, but proof that individual dedication to excellence could challenge institutional assumptions and create possibilities for systematic improvement. But even as Elena prepared for the transition to her expanded role, she found herself thinking about the weapons maintenance shop at Fort Braxton, about Marcus Chun and the other technicians who would continue performing routine maintenance according to standard protocols. Would her advancement improve conditions for those who remained in traditional roles? Or would it simply remove one advocate for excellence from a system that desperately needed reform at every level? The question would haunt her through the months ahead as she navigated the complex transition from individual perfectionism to institutional influence. But for now, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at the recognition that her work had earned, and the opportunity to expand her impact beyond the limitations of individual effort. The revelation phase of her journey was complete. Her capabilities had been recognized, her methods validated, and her potential for systematic impact acknowledged at the highest levels of military authority. What remained was the far more complex challenge of transforming individual excellence into institutional change without losing the commitment to perfection that had made her valuable in the first place. 6 months after her first meeting with Dr. Mitchell, Elena stood in a state-of-the-art research facility at Aberdeen Proving Ground, watching a dozen weapons technicians apply the diagnostic techniques she'd developed over years of solitary pursuit. The transformation from individual craftsman to institutional innovator had been more challenging than she'd anticipated, requiring her to articulate intuitive knowledge in ways that could be systematically taught and replicated. The training development center hummed with activity that would have been impossible to imagine during her quiet mornings at Fort Braxton. Advanced testing equipment measured performance improvements in real time, while video recording systems documented every step of the modification process for inclusion in updated technical manuals. Elena's individual pursuit of perfection had become a catalyst for the most comprehensive revision of small arms maintenance protocols in decades. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, one of Elena's first students in the new training program, completed a precision adjustment to a Barrett rifle's gas system and looked up with evident satisfaction. "Sergeant Vasquez, the performance data shows a 19% improvement in accuracy and a 12% increase in reliability over standard specifications. These results are consistent across all the weapons we've modified using your techniques." Elena felt the familiar mixture of pride and responsibility that accompanied successful implementation of her methods. But she also recognized that Santos and the other technicians were achieving results that exceeded her own early efforts, benefiting from systematic instruction and advanced equipment that had never been available during her individual experimentation. Dr. Mitchell approached Elena's workstation, carrying a briefing folder that contained the latest results from field testing of weapons modified according to the new protocols. "Elena, I have updates from 3 separate deployments where units are using equipment modified by technicians trained in your methods. The performance improvements are holding up under combat conditions, and we're seeing significant reductions in maintenance-related failures." Elena studied the data, recognizing patterns that validated her fundamental belief that superior maintenance could prevent the kind of equipment failures that had cost Staff Sergeant Kumar his life. But the statistics also revealed something she hadn't anticipated. Her techniques were evolving through application by other technicians, improving beyond her original methods through collaborative refinement. Dr. Mitchell, Elena said, what strikes me about these results is that the technicians aren't just applying my modifications, they're improving them. Santos found a way to optimize the bolt timing that I never considered. Sergeant Rodriguez developed a coding application technique that reduces maintenance intervals while improving performance. Dr. Mitchell smiled, recognizing that Elena was describing the natural evolution of institutional learning from individual innovation. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Your original work provided the foundation, but collaborative development is producing improvements that exceed anything possible through individual effort alone. Elena felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and humility as she realized that her contribution had been not just technical innovation, but the catalyst for a cultural shift toward higher standards of weapons maintenance across the entire Army. Her individual pursuit of perfection had demonstrated what was possible, inspiring others to push beyond traditional limitations. The door to the training center opened to admit Colonel Morrison, accompanied by a figure Elena recognized from newspaper photographs, General Sarah Chun, the Army's Chief of Staff. Elena's stomach clenched as she realized that her work had attracted attention from the highest levels of military leadership. Sergeant Vasquez, General Chun said, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected hundreds of thousands of soldiers. I'm here because the results you've achieved have implications that extend far beyond small arms maintenance. What you've demonstrated is that individual excellence can catalyze systematic improvement in ways we hadn't previously understood. Elena felt the weight of institutional attention that had become familiar over the previous months, but General Chun's presence represented a level of recognition that still felt surreal. Ma'am, I've been fortunate to work with exceptional people who've helped scale individual techniques into systematic improvements. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, consulting notes that appeared to contain operational updates. General, the field reports continue to validate our investment in this program. Units equipped with weapons modified according to Sergeant Vasquez's protocols are experiencing failure rates that are 73% lower than baseline, with accuracy improvements that exceed our most optimistic projections. General. Chun nodded, but Elena sensed that the general's interest extended beyond technical performance metrics. Sergeant Vasquez, what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between individual expertise and institutional capability. Your work suggests that excellence is scalable in ways we hadn't previously recognized. Elena realized that she was being asked to reflect on implications that extended far beyond weapons maintenance to questions of leadership development, training methodology, and organizational culture. Her individual pursuit of perfection had become a case study in how the military could better harness individual talent for collective improvement. Ma'am, Elena said carefully, what I've learned is that excellence requires both individual commitment and institutional support. My original work was limited by resource constraints and isolation. But the systematic approach we've developed here amplifies individual capability through collaboration and shared learning. Dr. Mitchell consulted her tablet, scrolling through data that Elena couldn't see, but which apparently contained information about the broader impact of their program. General, we're also seeing secondary effects that we hadn't anticipated. Technicians trained in Sergeant Vasquez's methods are applying similar analytical approaches to other equipment systems. We're getting reports of improvements in vehicle maintenance, communications equipment, and even logistics processes. Elena felt a surge of unexpected pride as she realized that her commitment to individual excellence had inspired others to pursue similar standards in their own specialties. The pursuit of perfection was proving to be contagious in ways that transcended specific technical domains. General Chun studied Elena with the kind of assessment that suggested recognition of potential beyond current assignments. Sergeant Vasquez, I'm here to offer you an opportunity that reflects the Army's commitment to supporting excellence at every level. We're creating a new position, Chief Warrant Officer for Weapons Systems Optimization, with responsibility for developing and implementing advanced maintenance protocols across all branches of service. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she processed the magnitude of what was being offered. Chief Warrant Officer represented not just promotion, but transformation into a technical specialist with authority and resources that could affect weapons systems across the entire military. But even as the opportunity beckoned, Elena found herself thinking about the soldiers who would continue to depend on weapons, maintained according to whatever standards she helped establish. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential for impact that could save lives through superior equipment reliability. Ma'am, Elena said finally, I'm honored by the confidence you're showing in my work. But I need to know that this position will maintain focus on the individual attention to detail that makes the difference between acceptable performance and optimal performance. General Chun smiled, recognition dawning in her expression. Sergeant Vasquez, that's exactly why you're the right person for this responsibility. The military needs leaders who understand that systematic excellence requires individual commitment at every level. Elena looked around the training center, seeing the technicians who had embraced her methods and improved upon them, the advanced equipment that amplified individual capability, and the institutional support that had transformed her solitary pursuit into collaborative innovation. The Barrett rifle that had started everything sat in a place of honor, a reminder of what individual dedication could achieve when properly supported. Master Sergeant Williams entered the training center, carrying himself with the same quiet authority. Elena remembered from their first encounter. General, I have an update from the field that I think you'll want to hear. Last week, units equipped with weapons modified according to Sergeant Vasquez's protocols conducted operations in 3 different theaters. 0 equipment failures, performance that exceeded mission requirements, and feedback from operators indicating significantly increased confidence in their equipment. Elena felt tears threatening as she recognized the ultimate validation of everything she'd worked to achieve. Her pursuit of individual perfection had become the foundation for systematic improvements that were protecting soldiers in combat situations around the world. The transformation from weapons maintenance technician to senior warrant officer represented validation beyond anything she'd dared imagine. But more importantly, it represented the opportunity to ensure that her commitment to excellence would continue to benefit the soldiers who depended on superior equipment performance. As the ceremony concluded, and Elena prepared for the transition to her expanded responsibilities, she found herself thinking about Staff Sergeant Kumar, about the preventable failure that had motivated her original pursuit of perfection. His death had inspired individual dedication that ultimately catalyzed institutional change, transforming personal tragedy into systematic improvement that would protect countless other soldiers. The legacy Elena was building extended beyond technical innovation to cultural transformation, demonstrating that individual excellence could inspire institutional commitment to higher standards. Her journey from solitary perfectionist to collaborative leader represented the military's capacity for recognizing and nurturing talent regardless of its unconventional origins. But beneath all the recognition and advancement, one truth remained constant. Somewhere at that very moment, soldiers were conducting operations with weapons that performed exactly as promised, because individual technicians had embraced standards of excellence that refused to accept good enough as adequate. Chief Warrant Officer Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Advanced Weapons Development Center at Picatinny Arsenal, watching as teams of technicians applied refinements to maintenance protocols that had evolved far beyond her original innovations. The institutional transformation she'd catalyzed had taken on a life of its own, producing improvements that exceeded anything she could have achieved through individual effort alone. The morning briefing reports lay spread across her desk, containing performance data from weapon systems maintained according to protocols that bore her name but reflected the collaborative genius of hundreds of technicians who had embraced her commitment to excellence. Equipment failure rates had dropped by 68% across all platforms, while accuracy and reliability improvements had become the new baseline for military weapons performance. Dr. Mitchell, now promoted to Director of Advanced Maintenance Research, approached with her daily update on field performance metrics. Elena, the latest reports from Afghanistan show continued validation of our approach. The 3rd Infantry Division is reporting weapons performance that exceeds manufacturer specifications by margins that would have been impossible 3 years ago. Elena studied the data with satisfaction, tempered by awareness that excellence required constant vigilance. Dr. Mitchell, what concerns me is that success might breed complacency. The moment we start taking these improvements for granted is the moment we begin sliding back toward good enough standards. Before Dr. Mitchell could respond, Elena's attention was drawn to a group of young technicians working at the advanced testing stations below. Among them, she recognized Private First Class Jessica Martinez, a recent graduate of the expanded training program who had already identified improvements to Elena's original gas system modifications. Dr. Mitchell, Elena said, pointing toward Martinez's workstation, that's what gives me hope for the future. She's not just applying our protocols, she's questioning them, testing them, pushing beyond what we've established. That's the kind of thinking that prevents institutional stagnation. Dr. Mitchell nodded, following Elena's gaze to the young technician who was documenting performance improvements that seemed to defy conventional understanding. Martinez represents the 2nd generation of your approach, Elena. She's building on your foundation but bringing her own insights and innovations. Elena felt a complex mixture of pride and humility as she watched Martinez work with the same intense focus that had once characterized her own solitary pursuit of perfection. The individual dedication was the same, but the collaborative environment amplified its impact in ways Elena was still learning to appreciate. A knock at her office door interrupted Elena's observations. Master Sergeant Williams entered, now serving as senior liaison between field units and the development center. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed transformation at both individual and institutional levels. Chief Vasquez, Williams said, I have updates from the Special Operations Command that I think you'll want to hear. The weapon systems they're using, modified according to your advanced protocols, performed flawlessly during last month's mission in Syria. More importantly, the technicians maintaining those weapons have developed their own improvements that exceed even our latest specifications. Elena felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that accompanied news of her work's practical impact, but Williams's mention of technician-driven improvements reminded her that the most significant legacy of her efforts wasn't technical innovation, it was cultural transformation that inspired others to pursue their own excellence. Master Sergeant, Elena said, what strikes me about these reports is that we're seeing the emergence of a culture where excellence is expected, not exceptional. That's the kind of systematic change that will outlast any individual contribution. Williams smiled, recognizing the deeper truth in Elena's observation. Chief, what you started with that Barrett rifle wasn't just technical modification, it was proof that individual commitment to perfection could challenge institutional assumptions and create new possibilities. Elena looked out at the bustling research facility, seeing dozens of technicians applying methods that had evolved from her original innovations, but now reflected the collective genius of collaborative development. The individual pursuit of perfection had become the foundation for institutional excellence that protected soldiers around the world. 5 years later, the auditorium at the Army War College was packed with senior officers, defense contractors, and government officials who had gathered to hear Elena present the keynote address at the annual Symposium on Military Innovation. The transformation from weapons maintenance technician to recognized authority on systematic excellence represented a journey that still felt surreal despite years of institutional recognition. Elena's presentation focused not on her technical innovations, but on the cultural conditions that enabled individual excellence to catalyze institutional change. The Barrett rifle that had started everything sat in a display case beside the podium, accompanied by examples of weapons modified by technicians she had trained, each representing iterative improvements that had pushed performance beyond her original achievements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned credibility through demonstrated results. "What we've learned over the past 5 years is that excellence is not a destination, it's a culture that must be continuously nurtured and challenged." The audience listened with the attention accorded to speakers whose ideas had proven their worth through practical application. Elena's methods had been adopted by allied militaries around the world, creating international standards for weapons maintenance that elevated performance expectations across entire defense establishments. The individual pursuit of perfection that started in a maintenance shop at Fort Braxton has become a collaborative movement that involves thousands of technicians, engineers, and operators, Elena continued. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged, refusing to accept good enough when lives depend on optimal performance. During the question and answer session that followed, Elena was approached by a young captain whose earnest expression reminded her of her own early commitment to technical excellence. "Chief Vasquez," the captain said, "I'm responsible for weapons maintenance in my unit, and I'm struggling with how to balance efficiency demands with the kind of individual attention your methods require. How do you maintain standards when institutional pressures prioritize speed over optimization?" Elena recognized the fundamental challenge that every technician faced: the tension between administrative efficiency and technical excellence. Her response drew from years of experience navigating institutional bureaucracy while maintaining commitment to superior performance. "Captain, what I've learned is that true efficiency comes from doing things right the first time, even if it takes longer initially. Equipment that performs optimally requires less maintenance, experiences fewer failures, and provides superior operational capability. The investment in individual attention pays dividends in reliability and performance that more than compensate for increased maintenance time." The captain nodded, but Elena sensed that he was struggling with practical constraints that she remembered from her own early career. She made a mental note to follow up with specific guidance tailored to his unit's circumstances, recognizing that institutional change required individual support at every level. 10 years later, Elena stood in the same weapons maintenance shop at Fort Braxton where her journey had begun, now serving as a periodic consultant while enjoying the freedom of retirement from active duty. The workshop had been transformed into a training facility that bore her name, but the fundamental purpose remained unchanged: ensuring that weapons performed exactly as soldiers expected them to perform. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now the facility's senior instructor, was demonstrating advanced diagnostic techniques to a class of international students whose governments had sent them to learn methods that had revolutionized military weapons maintenance worldwide. "Chief Vasquez," Rodriguez said, acknowledging Elena's presence with the respect accorded to mentors whose influence had shaped entire careers, "would you like to address the students? They're eager to hear from the person whose individual commitment to excellence transformed how we think about weapons optimization. Elena stepped forward, studying the faces of young technicians who represented the future of military maintenance. Across multiple nations, their presence demonstrated that the pursuit of individual excellence could transcend national boundaries and create international standards that protected soldiers regardless of flag or uniform. "Students," Elena began, "what you're learning here isn't just technical procedure. It's a commitment to the idea that someone else's life may depend on the quality of your work. That responsibility demands excellence that goes beyond minimum standards, beyond acceptable performance, beyond what regulations require." After the class concluded, Elena found herself alone in the workshop where her journey had begun. The Barrett rifle that had started everything was no longer a singular example of modified excellence. It was one among thousands of weapons that performed at levels that would have been considered impossible a decade earlier. Marcus Chun, now retired but still living nearby, joined Elena for their weekly coffee in the workshop that had become a pilgrimage site for technicians seeking to understand the origins of systematic excellence. "Elena," Marcus said, settling onto the familiar stool beside her workbench, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Special Forces hadn't noticed your modifications? If you'd continued working in anonymity, pursuing individual perfection without institutional recognition?" Elena considered the question, thinking about the alternative timeline where her individual commitment to excellence remained personal rather than professional. "Marcus, I think about that regularly. The technical improvements would have been limited to weapons that passed through my hands, but the cultural impact, the demonstration that individual excellence could challenge institutional assumptions, might never have occurred." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Private Martinez, now Sergeant First Class Martinez, and recognized as one of the most innovative weapons technicians in the Army. She carried a tablet containing performance data from the latest generation of maintenance protocols, improvements that had evolved far beyond Elena's original innovations. "Chief Vasquez," Martinez said, "I wanted to share the latest results from the Advanced Optimization Program. We're seeing performance improvements that exceed even your original projections, and the techniques are being applied to weapon systems that didn't exist when you started this work." Elena studied the data with satisfaction that was tempered by awareness that excellence required continuous evolution. The young technicians who had embraced her commitment to perfection were now pushing beyond her achievements, creating innovations that would benefit soldiers she would never meet. "Sergeant Martinez," Elena said, "what gives me the greatest satisfaction is knowing that the pursuit of excellence has become self-sustaining. You and your colleagues aren't just applying my methods, you're improving them, questioning them, pushing beyond what I established." Martinez smiled, recognizing the deeper truth in Elena's observation. "Chief, what you taught us wasn't just technical procedure, it was the idea that we have a responsibility to pursue perfection, regardless of institutional constraints or conventional limitations." As evening approached and the workshop emptied, Elena remained at her original workbench, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had become extensions of her commitment to excellence. The Barrett rifle sat in its place of honor, no longer unique but representative of a transformation that had affected weapon systems around the world. The journey from individual perfectionist to institutional catalyst had exceeded anything Elena could have imagined. When she first began modifying weapons in pursuit of performance that matched her standards rather than regulations. But the fundamental motivation remained unchanged, ensuring that soldiers received equipment that performed exactly as promised when their lives depended on it. 15 years later, Elena's granddaughter, Second Lieutenant Sarah Vasquez, stood in the same weapons maintenance facility where her grandmother's legacy had begun, preparing to implement the latest generation of optimization protocols that bore little resemblance to Elena's original modifications, but reflected the same commitment to excellence. The technology had evolved dramatically. Artificial intelligence now assisted in diagnostic procedures. Advanced materials provided capabilities that Elena's generation could never have imagined. And international cooperation had created standardized excellence across allied militaries worldwide. But the fundamental principle remained unchanged: individual commitment to perfection as the foundation for institutional excellence. Elena watched from the observation deck as Sarah led a team of technicians through procedures that represented 15 years of collaborative evolution from her original innovations. The Barrett rifle that had started everything remained in its display case, now accompanied by examples of weapon systems that demonstrated how individual excellence could become the catalyst for technological revolution. Grandmother, Sarah, said during their after-duty conversation, "The reports from the field continue to validate everything you established. Equipment failure rates are approaching zero. Performance exceeds manufacturer specifications by margins that redefine what's possible, and soldiers have confidence in their equipment that previous generations never experienced." Elena felt tears threatening as she recognized that her individual pursuit of perfection had become a multi-generational legacy that would continue long after her own contribution was forgotten. The commitment to excellence had become cultural DNA that would influence military technology for decades to come. "Sarah," Elena said finally, "what matters isn't that my modifications started this transformation. It's that each generation of technicians has embraced the responsibility to push beyond what the previous generation achieved. Excellence is a relay race, not a destination." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Williams, now serving as a senior consultant despite his official retirement. His presence had become a tradition at the facility, representing continuity between Elena's original innovations and their contemporary applications. "Chief Vasquez," Williams said, using the title that had become his permanent form of address regardless of Elena's civilian status, "I have news from the field that completes the circle in a way you'll appreciate. Yesterday, a unit in Afghanistan recovered a weapon system that failed during a critical engagement. The investigation revealed that it had been maintained according to pre-optimization protocols, a reminder of what soldiers faced before your work transformed our standards." Elena felt the weight of that comparison, recognizing that the equipment failure Williams described represented the kind of preventable tragedy that had motivated her original pursuit of perfection. The contrast between contemporary performance and historical limitations validated every hour she'd spent pursuing excellence beyond regulation requirements. As the day concluded and Elena prepared to leave the facility that had become her legacy, she paused at the display case containing the Barrett rifle that had started everything. The weapon looked smaller than she remembered, less significant than the transformation it had catalyzed. But she knew that its true importance lay not in its technical modifications, but in its demonstration that individual commitment to excellence could challenge institutional assumptions and create possibilities for systematic improvement. The inscription beneath the display case captured the essence of what Elena had achieved. Excellence is not a skill. It is an attitude that demands the best of ourselves and inspires the best in others. When lives depend on performance, good enough is never enough. Elena walked out of the facility into the evening air, carrying with her the satisfaction of knowing that her individual pursuit of perfection had become an institutional commitment to excellence that would protect soldiers for generations to come. The Barrett rifle remained behind, but the culture of excellence it represented had become permanent. Somewhere, at that very moment, technicians around the world were applying methods that had evolved from her original innovations, ensuring that weapons performed exactly as soldiers expected them to perform. The relay race of excellence continued, each generation building on the achievements of their predecessors while pushing toward new standards of perfection. Elena's journey from weapons maintenance technician to catalyst for institutional transformation represented more than professional advancement. It demonstrated the military's capacity for recognizing and nurturing individual excellence regardless of its unconventional origins. Her legacy would endure not in the specific modifications she had developed, but in the culture of continuous improvement she had inspired. The pursuit of perfection, once a solitary obsession conducted in the quiet hours before dawn, had become a collaborative movement that spanned continents and generations. Individual excellence had proven to be the foundation for institutional transformation that would benefit soldiers whose names Elena would never know, but whose lives were protected by her unwavering commitment to standards that exceeded every regulation and surpassed every expectation. 20 years after that first Barrett modification, Elena Vasquez stood in a place she never could have imagined, the White House Rose Garden, preparing to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to military innovation and soldier safety. The ceremony represented the culmination of a journey that had transformed not just her own life, but the fundamental approach to weapons maintenance across all branches of the military. President Jennifer Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, approached the podium with the gravity appropriate for recognizing contributions that had saved countless lives through superior equipment reliability. The assembled crowd included generals, defense secretaries, and foreign military attaches who had implemented Elena's methods in their own nations. Today, the president began, we honor an individual whose commitment to excellence transformed institutional failure into systematic success. Chief Warrant Officer Elena Vasquez proved that individual dedication to perfection could catalyze changes that protect soldiers around the world. Elena felt the familiar mixture of pride and humility that had accompanied every recognition throughout her career. But standing in the Rose Garden, surrounded by the highest levels of American leadership, she found herself thinking not about personal achievement, but about the thousands of technicians who had embraced her methods and improved upon them. The medal itself was beautiful, a golden star suspended from a blue ribbon that represented the highest civilian honor the nation could bestow. But as the president placed it around Elena's neck, Elena's thoughts turned to Staff Sergeant Kumar, whose preventable death had motivated her original pursuit of perfection. This recognition belonged as much to him as to her. Chief Vasquez, the president continued, your work demonstrates that excellence is not just personal achievement. It's a responsibility we owe to those who depend on us. Your modifications to a single rifle became the foundation for systematic improvements that have revolutionized military technology worldwide. During the reception that followed, Elena was approached by General Patricia Hawthorne, now serving as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The general's presence carried the authority of someone who had witnessed Elena's transformation from anonymous technician to international authority on weapons optimization. Elena, General Hawthorne said, using the informal address that had become customary among the senior leadership who had supported her work, I have updates from the field that validate everything we've invested in your methods. Last month's operations in Eastern Europe involved weapons systems maintained according to protocols you developed 20 years ago. 0 failures, performance that exceeded mission requirements, and feedback from operators indicating complete confidence in their equipment. Elena felt the satisfaction that accompanied news of her work's continued relevance, but she also recognized that the methods bearing her name had evolved far beyond her original innovations. The collaborative genius of thousands of technicians had created capabilities that exceeded anything she could have achieved through individual effort alone. General, Elena replied, what gives me the greatest satisfaction is knowing that the pursuit of excellence has become self-sustaining. The technicians applying these methods aren't just following procedures, they're improving them, questioning them, pushing beyond what any individual could establish. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as Director of Advanced Military Technology Research at the Pentagon. Her presence represented the institutional support that had transformed Elena's individual innovations into systematic improvements affecting millions of weapons worldwide. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena, Dr. Mitchell said, I wanted to share the latest data from our global implementation assessment. 37 nations have adopted protocols based on your methods, resulting in equipment reliability improvements that average 68% across all platforms. The cultural impact has been even more significant. We're seeing the emergence of excellence-focused training programs that extend far beyond weapons maintenance. Elena studied the data with appreciation for its scope, but also with awareness. That success required continuous vigilance against complacency. The moment institutional excellence became routine rather than intentional was the moment it began deteriorating toward previous standards of good enough. Dr. Mitchell, Elena said, my concern is that success might breed institutional satisfaction. That undermines the individual commitment required to maintain these standards. Excellence isn't a destination, it's a culture that must be continuously renewed through personal dedication. Before Dr. Mitchell could respond, Elena's attention was drawn to a young officer approaching with the earnest expression of someone carrying important news. Captain Maria Rodriguez, daughter of the staff. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been among Elena's first students, wore the insignia of the newly created Military Excellence Corps, an organization that had emerged from Elena's work to identify and develop innovative approaches across all military specialties. Chief Vasquez, Captain Rodriguez said, I have an update from the Advanced Research Laboratory that I think you'll find significant. Our latest AI-assisted optimization protocols are producing performance improvements that exceed even your original projections, but they're based on diagnostic principles you established decades ago. Elena felt a complex mixture of pride and humility as she realized that artificial intelligence was now applying her methods at scales and speeds impossible for human technicians. The individual pursuit of perfection had become the foundation for technological capabilities that could optimize millions of weapons simultaneously. Captain Rodriguez, Elena said, what strikes me about AI implementation is that it amplifies human insight rather than replacing it. The algorithms are applying analytical approaches that originated from individual observation and experience. That's the kind of human-machine collaboration that represents the future of military excellence. The reception continued with conversations that spanned decades of innovation, but Elena found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet spaces where she could reflect on the magnitude of transformation that had emerged from her solitary pursuit of perfection. The Barrett rifle that had started everything now resided in the Smithsonian, but its true legacy lived in the culture of excellence that had become standard across military organizations worldwide. 3 months after the White House ceremony, Elena stood in the Advanced Military Technology Laboratory at MIT, where her granddaughter Sarah was completing doctoral research on next-generation weapons optimization. The laboratory represented the fusion of Elena's practical insights with cutting-edge academic research, creating possibilities that exceeded anything imaginable during her early career. Sarah's dissertation focused on predictive maintenance algorithms that could identify potential equipment failures before they occurred, preventing the kind of unexpected malfunctions that had once cost soldiers their lives. The research built on Elena's diagnostic methods, but employed machine learning and materials science that transformed individual expertise into systematic prediction. Grandmother, Sarah said, reviewing data streams that flowed across multiple displays, the algorithms we've developed can predict equipment failures up to 6 months in advance, with accuracy rates exceeding 97%. But the foundation remains the observational techniques you developed through hands-on experience. Elena studied the complex visualizations with appreciation for their sophistication, but also with recognition that the fundamental principles remained unchanged. Whether applied by individual technicians or artificial intelligence systems, excellence still required attention to microscopic details that determined the difference between optimal performance and catastrophic failure. "Sarah," Elena replied, "what impresses me most is that advanced technology amplifies rather than replaces human insight. The patterns your algorithms identify originated from individual observation and experience. That's the kind of human-machine collaboration that represents the future of excellence." The laboratory visit was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. James Chen, Marcus Chun's son, now serving as Director of International Military Technology Cooperation. His presence represented the global scope that Elena's work had achieved, spanning nations and cultures united by commitment to superior equipment performance. "Chief Vasquez," Dr. Chen said, "I have updates from the International Military Excellence Conference in Geneva. 43 nations have formally adopted protocols based on your methods, creating standardized approaches to weapons optimization that transcend national boundaries. We're seeing the emergence of truly global standards for military equipment reliability." Elena felt satisfaction at the international scope of impact, but also awareness that cultural differences would require adaptation of her methods to diverse military traditions and capabilities. Excellence was universal in principle, but required local implementation that respected individual national characteristics. "Dr. Chun," Elena said, "what concerns me about international standardization is maintaining the individual attention to detail that makes these methods effective. Different nations have different resources, different training traditions, different operational requirements. How do we preserve excellence while accommodating diversity?" Dr. Chen consulted his tablet, scrolling through implementation reports from military organizations around the world. "That's exactly the challenge we're addressing through the Cultural Adaptation Initiative. We're working with each nation to develop training programs that reflect your core principles while respecting local military traditions and capabilities." The conversation continued with discussions of implementation challenges and solutions, but Elena found herself thinking about the individual technicians in dozens of countries who were applying methods that had originated from her personal pursuit of perfection. Each represented a link in a chain of excellence that now spanned continents and cultures. Later that evening, Elena attended a dinner hosted by the MAT Military Innovation Laboratory, where she was introduced to students and researchers whose work extended her methods into fields she'd never imagined. Advanced materials science, quantum computing applications, biotechnology integration, all building on principles she'd developed through hands-on experience with individual weapons. Dr. Patricia Williams, now serving as MIT's Director of Military Technology Research, introduced Elena to a group of international graduate students whose research represented the next generation of innovation building on her foundation. "Chief Vasquez," Dr. Williams said, "these students are applying your diagnostic principles to everything from aircraft engines to missile guidance systems. What started with weapons maintenance has become a comprehensive approach to military technology optimization." Elena addressed the students with the same directness that had characterized her approach throughout her career. "What you're learning here isn't just technical procedure. It's a commitment to the idea that someone else's life may depend on the quality of your work. That responsibility demands excellence that goes beyond minimum standards, beyond acceptable performance, beyond what regulations require." A young lieutenant from the German army raised her hand with a question that Elena recognized from her own early career. "Chief Vasquez, how do you maintain individual standards of excellence within institutional systems that prioritize efficiency and standardization? How do you pursue perfection when bureaucratic pressures favor speed over optimization?" "Elena," smiled, recognizing the fundamental challenge that every technician faced regardless of nationality or service branch. "Lieutenant, what I've learned is that true efficiency comes from doing things right the first time, even if it takes longer initially. Equipment that performs optimally requires less maintenance, experiences fewer failures, and provides superior operational capability. The investment in individual attention pays dividends in reliability and performance that more than compensate for increased maintenance time." The student nodded, but Elena sensed the deeper struggle with practical constraints that she remembered from her own transition from individual perfectionism to institutional influence. She made a mental note to provide specific guidance tailored to international implementation challenges. 5 years after the Presidential Medal ceremony, Elena received a call that brought her full circle to the fundamental purpose that had motivated her original pursuit of perfection. Master Sergeant Williams, now retired but still serving as a consultant to Special Operations Command, requested her presence at a classified briefing that would demonstrate the ultimate validation of her life's work. The secure conference room at Fort Bragg was filled with senior officers and intelligence officials whose presence suggested operations at the highest levels of military significance. Elena's security clearance had been maintained despite her retirement, reflecting recognition that her expertise remained valuable for critical assessments. General Michael Thompson, now serving as commander of Special Operations Command, approached Elena with the respect accorded to legends whose contributions had shaped military capability at fundamental levels. "Chief Vasquez," General Thompson began, "we have a situation that requires your unique perspective. Tomorrow, a joint operation involving forces from 6 allied nations will conduct a mission that depends absolutely on weapons performance at the limits of technical capability. Every weapon system involved has been maintained according to protocols you developed, but the operational requirements exceed anything we've previously attempted." Elena felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that accompanied requests for her expertise in critical situations. But the international scope and extreme performance requirements suggested challenges that would test the limits of everything she'd helped establish. "General," Elena replied, "what specific capabilities are required? Are we dealing with extreme range, environmental conditions, sustained fire rates, or some combination of factors that pushes performance beyond standard specifications?" Colonel Sandra Mitchell, Dr. Mitchell's daughter, now serving as Director of Special Operations Technology, consulted classified briefing materials before responding. "Chief Vasquez, the mission requires precision shots at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, in environmental conditions that include temperature extremes, high humidity, and sustained operations over 72 hours. Any equipment failure could compromise mission success and endanger multiple allied units." Elena processed the requirements, recognizing that they exceeded the design parameters of even the most advanced weapon systems. Success would require not just optimal maintenance, but real-time adaptation to changing conditions that could affect performance in unpredictable ways. "Colonel Mitchell," Elena said, "those requirements suggest we need more than standard optimization protocols. We need adaptive maintenance capabilities that can adjust to changing conditions during the operation itself. Are the technicians prepared for that level of real-time modification?" Before Colonel Mitchell could respond, Master Sergeant Williams entered the briefing room carrying a familiar case that made Elena's pulse quicken. Inside was a Barrett M82, a one that appeared to be identical to the rifle that had started her journey 25 years earlier. But Elena recognized modifications that represented decades of collaborative improvement. "Chief Vasquez," Williams said, "this weapon represents the culmination of everything you started. It's been maintained according to the latest optimization protocols, but tomorrow's mission will require performance that exceeds even our most advanced specifications. We need you to review the weapon and certify that it's capable of meeting operational requirements." Elena accepted the case with hands that remained steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. Opening it revealed a rifle that bore little resemblance to the weapon she'd first modified in her solitary pursuit of perfection, but which embodied every principle she'd established through decades of innovation. The components showed evidence of manufacturing precision that exceeded anything available during her early career. Advanced coatings, precision tolerances, materials science applications, all building on her original insights, but representing collaborative advancement that exceeded her individual capabilities. Elena lifted the rifle with the reverence appropriate for an instrument that would soon protect soldiers in circumstances that demanded absolute reliability. Her experienced hands moved through diagnostic procedures that had become instinctive, checking tolerances and alignments with precision that remained unmatched despite advances in testing technology. "General Thompson," Elena said after completing her examination, "this weapon represents the best of everything we've learned over the past 25 years. The manufacturing quality exceeds my highest standards. The modifications reflect optimal application of every principle we've established, and the materials represent advances that I could never have imagined." General Thompson leaned forward with evident concern. "Chief Vasquez, that's exactly what we hope to hear. But tomorrow's mission will push this equipment to absolute limits. Based on your assessment, can we count on performance that will protect our people when everything else is uncertain?" Elena felt the weight of responsibility that had defined her entire career, but amplified by awareness that her assessment would affect soldiers from multiple nations conducting operations at the highest levels of significance. Her response would influence decisions that could determine mission success and individual survival. "General," Elena said with the authority earned through decades of demonstrated expertise, "this weapon will perform exactly as required, provided the operators understand its capabilities and limitations. The modifications exceed every specification we've established, but extreme conditions require operator awareness that matches technical capability." The briefing continued with operational details that Elena couldn't discuss publicly, but which demonstrated that her pursuit of individual perfection had become the foundation for international cooperation at the highest levels of military significance. Allied forces from 6 nations would rely on weapons maintained according to protocols she'd developed in a maintenance shop at Fort Braxton. 72 hours later, Elena received confirmation that the classified operation had succeeded completely, with 0 equipment failures and performance that exceeded all mission requirements. The Barrett rifle she'd certified had delivered precision shots at ranges exceeding 2,200 meters, maintaining accuracy despite environmental conditions that would have compromised standard equipment. But more significantly, the operation had involved weapon systems from 6 different nations, all maintained according to protocols that had evolved from her original innovations. International cooperation had been enabled by shared standards of excellence that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. Master Sergeant Williams visited Elena at her home with news that completed the circle of validation. "Chief Vasquez," he said, "the after-action report confirms that every weapon performed flawlessly throughout the entire operation. More importantly, the international cooperation was seamless because all participating forces shared common standards of equipment reliability." Elena felt satisfaction that exceeded any personal recognition she'd received. Her individual pursuit of perfection had become the foundation for international military cooperation that protected soldiers regardless of nationality or service branch. "Master Sergeant Williams," Elena replied, "what gives me the greatest satisfaction is knowing that excellence has become the standard rather than the exception. Soldiers from different nations can work together confidently because they share equipment that performs exactly as promised." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elena's great-granddaughter, Second Lieutenant Jennifer Vasquez, representing the fourth generation of family military service. Her presence symbolized the multi-generational impact of Elena's commitment to excellence, ensuring that future soldiers would benefit from standards established through individual dedication. "Great-grandmother," Jennifer said, "I wanted to share news from my unit. We're implementing the latest generation of optimization protocols, and the performance improvements exceed everything we studied in training. But what impresses me most is that these methods have become natural rather than exceptional. Excellence is simply what we expect." Elena felt tears threatening as she recognized that her greatest achievement wasn't technical innovation, but cultural transformation that had made excellence the standard expectation rather than extraordinary accomplishment. Individual commitment to perfection had become institutional DNA that would influence military technology for generations. "Jennifer," Elena said, "what matters isn't that my modification started this transformation. It's that each generation has embraced the responsibility to push beyond what the previous generation achieved. Excellence is a relay race, not a destination." That evening, Elena sat in her study surrounded by awards, commendations, and recognition that represented a lifetime of achievement beyond anything she'd imagined possible. But her attention was drawn to a simple photograph: Staff Sergeant Kumar, whose preventable death had motivated her original pursuit of perfection. The photograph represented both tragedy and triumph. Tragedy, because one good soldier had died due to preventable equipment failure. But triumph because his death had inspired systematic changes that had saved countless other lives through superior equipment reliability. Elena's phone rang with a call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as Secretary of Defense Technology Innovation. "Elena," Dr. Mitchell said, "I have final confirmation that the optimization protocols bearing your name have been formally adopted by all NATO members and 47 additional nations. We've achieved truly global standards for military equipment reliability." Elena felt the satisfaction of knowing that her individual pursuit of perfection had become universal commitment to excellence that protected soldiers worldwide. But she also recognized that maintaining these standards would require continuous renewal through individual dedication at every level. "Dr. Mitchell," Elena replied, "what concerns me is that institutional success might breed complacency that undermines the individual commitment required to maintain these standards. Excellence isn't automatic, it requires personal dedication. That must be renewed by each generation." Dr. Mitchell paused before responding, recognizing the deeper truth in Elena's observation. "Elena, that's exactly why we're establishing the Vasquez Institute for Military Excellence, a permanent institution dedicated to training technicians who understand that excellence is a responsibility, not just a procedure." Elena felt humility at the honor, but also awareness that institutional recognition carried obligations to ensure that future generations understood excellence as personal commitment rather than inherited achievement. 30 years after her first Barrett modification, Elena Vasquez passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family members whose military service spanned 4 generations. Her funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by senior officers from dozens of nations, technicians whose lives had been shaped by her methods, and soldiers whose lives had been saved by equipment maintained according to her standards. Barrett rifle that had started everything was carried by an honor guard representing all branches of service, symbolizing the transformation from individual innovation to institutional excellence that would continue long after Elena's personal contribution was complete. President Martinez delivered the eulogy with words that captured Elena's fundamental legacy: Chief Warrant Officer. Elena Vasquez proved that individual commitment to excellence could transform institutional capability in ways that protect those who serve our nation and our allies. Her pursuit of perfection became a beacon that guides military technology toward standards worthy of the soldiers who depend on it. But Elena's true legacy wasn't measured in awards or recognition. It lived in the culture of excellence that had become standard across military organizations worldwide. Technicians on every continent applied methods that had evolved from her original innovations, ensuring that weapons performed exactly as soldiers expected them to perform. The Vasquez Institute for Military Excellence became the global center for training technicians who understood excellence as personal responsibility rather than institutional procedure. Students from around the world learned not just technical methods, but the commitment to perfection that had motivated Elena's original pursuit. 5 years after Elena's death, her great-great-granddaughter, Cadet Rebecca Vasquez, stood in the same weapons maintenance facility at Fort Braxton where Elena's journey had begun. The facility had been transformed into a museum and training center, but the fundamental purpose remained unchanged, ensuring that weapons performed exactly as soldiers expected them to perform. The Barrett rifle that had started everything remained in its place of honor, accompanied by examples of weapons systems that demonstrated how individual excellence could become the catalyst for technological revolution. But the true legacy wasn't in the artifacts, it was in the culture of excellence that had become permanent. Rebecca studied the inscription beneath Elena's portrait. Excellence is not a skill, it is an attitude that demands the best of ourselves and inspires the best in others. When lives depend on performance, good enough is never enough. The words captured Elena's fundamental belief that individual commitment to perfection was both personal responsibility and professional obligation. Her pursuit of excellence had begun with grief over preventable failure, but had evolved into systematic improvement that protected soldiers worldwide. As Rebecca prepared for her own military career, she carried with her the understanding that excellence was not inherited, but earned through individual dedication to standards that exceeded every regulation and surpassed every expectation. Elena's legacy would continue through personal commitment that refused to accept good enough when lives depended on optimal performance. Somewhere, at that very moment, technicians around the world were applying methods that had evolved from Elena's original innovations, ensuring that weapons performed exactly as soldiers expected them to perform. The relay race of excellence continued, each generation building on the achievements of their predecessors while pushing toward new standards of perfection. Elena Vasquez had proven that individual commitment to excellence could transform institutional capability in ways that transcended personal achievement. Her legacy would endure not in specific modifications or procedures, but in the culture of continuous improvement that had become permanent across military organizations worldwide. The pursuit of perfection, once a solitary obsession conducted in the quiet hours before dawn, had become a collaborative movement that spanned continents and generations. Individual excellence had proven to be the foundation for institutional transformation that would benefit soldiers whose names Elena would never know, but whose lives were protected by her unwavering commitment to standards that exceeded every regulation and surpassed every expectation. The Barrett .50 that had revealed her extraordinary capabilities to special forces had become a symbol of what individual dedication could achieve when properly supported and systematically implemented. But the true measure of Elena's impact wasn't in any single weapon or modification. It was in the culture of excellence that had become the standard expectation for military equipment worldwide. Her journey from anonymous weapons maintenance technician to catalyst for institutional transformation represented more than professional advancement. It demonstrated that individual commitment to perfection could inspire systematic change that protected those who served their nations with courage and honor. The story of Elena Vasquez proved that excellence was not just personal achievement, but a responsibility owed to those who depended on optimal performance when their lives hung in the balance. Her legacy would endure as long as soldiers carried weapons into combat, because the culture of excellence she had inspired had become permanent. In military facilities around the world, technicians continued the work Elena had begun, applying Methods that had evolved from her original innovations, but reflected the same fundamental commitment, ensuring that weapons performed exactly as promised when everything else failed. The pursuit of perfection had become a sacred trust, passed from generation to generation of those who understood that good enough was never sufficient when lives depended on absolute reliability. Elena's greatest achievement wasn't technical innovation, it was proving that individual excellence could become institutional culture that transcended personal contribution. Her legacy lived not in museums or monuments, but in the hands of technicians who refused to accept anything less than perfection because someone else's life might depend on the quality of their work. The Barrett .50 that had started everything remained a symbol of transformation, but the true revolution was cultural, the establishment of excellence as the standard, expectation rather than extraordinary achievement. Elena Vasquez had changed not just how weapons were maintained, but how military organizations thought about the relationship between individual commitment and institutional capability. Her story would inspire future generations of military personnel who understood that excellence was not just professional obligation, but moral responsibility to those who depended on optimal performance in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The culture of perfection Elena had established would continue to protect soldiers whose names she would never know, but whose lives were safeguarded by her unwavering commitment to standards that exceeded every expectation.